Yeah, people is arriving. Yeah, we have 15 people, so we're gonna wait just 1 minute to make them to be sure that we are all in them. Thank you, Vic. Thank you, Rosa. Well, sorry, my apologize for being late, and we have some uh, technological issues before we start our webinar on time, but we are ready now. Thank you so much for joining this space. Welcome to all to this parallel webinar on the NGO CSW 66. I'm very pleased to moderate this conversation on achievement, gender equality, and women's empowerment toward a gender just transition, energy transition. My name is Liliana Avila, and I'm the Human Rights and Environmental Program Coordinator in AIDA. AIDA is the Inter-American Association on Environmental Defense. Today, we have a great panel with terrific leaders with a lot of experience in different areas, backgrounds in gender equality, energy transition, climate justice. The idea of this panel is to have an open, interactive conversation between all of us about a fundamental issue regarding how to achieve gender equality and women empowerment and just transition. The methodology proposed is very interactive. Firstly, all the panelists will have 2 minutes to present their work on the topic of this panel, the work that they do from the organizations they work for. And secondly, we're going to have two main discussions. One about the challenges and opportunities that the just transition movement can represent for women's rights. And the other one is about sharing knowledge, strategies, and shared visions on how the decarbonization of energy systems could contribute to the women's empowerment and the advantage of women's rights. So let's start with the presentation, and we'll pass the floor to Juliet. So please, Juliet, tell us what do you do, and what does your organization for energy transition and just transition?
Thanks, Liliana. So first off, it's an absolute pleasure to be on this panel and to have co-organized this event with AIDA and a lot of other NGOs, including Public Services International and ActionAid and APWLD. It's been an absolute pleasure. So as already said, I'm Juliette. My pronouns are she, her, and I work for the Global Initiative on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights as a fellow on climate change and a focal point for all the work that we do around the UN Geneva human rights mechanisms. So specifically on this area, or GI in general, we've been focusing on three main areas, which is on one hand, public services, fiscal policy, and then the one that's probably most interesting for today, even though they're all intersect in many different areas, how we can basically frame a gender-just green transition. So we've done a lot of different work, specifically also around women's participation in the renewable energy transition, which has been a big focus that we've been working on. And we've done a lot of advocacy around the UN mechanisms and other UN spaces to promote a gender-just energy transition, a gender-just green transition, and especially approach, and specifically an approach in which human rights are basically used as a guiding compass for the renewable energy transition. And thanks, Alison. I have a tendency to speak really fast, so I'm gonna try to slow this down a little bit. But yeah, so that's what GI is doing on their side, on our side, and yeah, very excited for this discussion for today.
Thank you, Juliet. So in the order that I got you in the screen, Teresa, could you please tell us what you do?
Hi, hi everyone. Me llamo Teresa Anderson from ActionAid International. Soy inglesa o filipina. prefiero hablar en inglés. So as ActionAid International, we've developed some principles for just transitions, but in agriculture and extractive sector, because if we are to avoid runaway climate breakdown, we need to see radical transformations in the energy sector, of course, but also in our food systems, transport, industrial, extractive systems. So as ActionAid, we work with rural communities, particularly women farmers, and also with communities that live in areas that are targeted for extraction of fossil fuels and minerals. So we were very inspired by our allies in the trade unions who have done great thinking about just transition in the energy sector. We wanted to understand how to ensure these transformations in other sectors can really take account of the needs of communities who would be most affected by these changes. So we spoke to many different actors, and we realized that pretty much all of the interventions that are needed to ensure a transition is just fall into 4 broad areas. And these are key because millions of people may need to change the way they make their livelihoods or feed themselves. So it's important, firstly, that actions address and do not exacerbate inequality, because we need to understand that existing inequalities and challenges are already there within the sector and must be addressed by a just transition. Secondly,
we're gonna in this moment we're gonna present all of you, and then we're gonna have time to deep our discussion. So please keep your thoughts and keep your thoughts, and then we can hear you deeper. So now, please, Rosa, in 2 minutes, tell us what you do and the relevant job you are doing in just transition and gender equality.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, I don't know. Yes, as a PSI, we are focusing our work toward a just transition that include women in all spheres of activities. For us, one of the most important theme is the sexual division of work that we want to tackle and we want to change. This is impacting, of course, the areas, the sphere of all our social relations in terms of labor, in terms of our communities, and it has an importance also in the energy sector, which is a male-dominated sector. We also think that energy democracy is one of the principles that has to inspire this just transition. And we are fighting against this trend where corporates and energy producers are actually greenwashing rather than introducing measures that can lead to a just transition.
Thank you, Rosa. And last but not least, please, Bonan, tell us your experience on gender and just transition.
Thank you very much for this invitation to share. My name is Wanan Kermpibun, and I am working with Climate Watch Thailand. And also we are a member in the Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development, or APWLD. Our work is both on the energy and also on the adaptation sector. But on the energy part, we are promoting, of course, in terms of not just only the supply side, in terms of renewable sources of energy, but also looking at the demand side as well, because we think that the demand side is really low cost and it doesn't really require a lot of investment. And we are together with the local communities and the women, we are looking into the power sector scenario of Thailand and the Mekong region, that the conventional sources of energy is not needed in the next 20 years. So, and then what would be the alternative to those new resources? And along the way that it has to be in a transition, what is needed along the transition, apart from renewable source of energy, decentralized energy system, and also demand side management, and also energy democracy. And together with APWLD, we are engaging with the local communities, women on the ground, in looking at how women could also contribute to the just transition, and what should also be kind of the role in the policy making that women could also play, and what kind of support that women need to have in terms of the direct access. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all to the people join the webinar. We have a lot of people from all around the country, people who is having breakfast now, and other ones that are on bed. So, so thank you once again for joining and to be interested on talking about gender and just transition. So let's start with our main discussions. So the idea is just to have a open, affluent conversation. So please feel free to raise your hand or interact with your partner, and let's talk about let's talk about the challenges and opportunity to the just transition movement. And so I'm gonna start asking a few questions so you can start talking about the things that your thoughts about that issues. My first question will be why is important to look at women's role within the green transition, and also how can energy transition be used as an opportunity to advance a feminist and low carbon future? So please feel free to whoever wants to start.
Happy to kickstart us off. Thank you. So why is it important to look at women's role in the energy transition? I think there is a very crucial element, which seems maybe a bit obvious, but it's the fact that more than 50% of our planet are women, and people that identify as women. Who are those women? So apology for that one. So generally, I mean, women do face the brunt of the climate crisis. We have been neglected in so many of the discussions. Women are more likely to end up in poverty or be in poverty. Women are more likely to be or underlie a systemic system that leads to discrimination, which hinders our access to resources to deal with the climate crisis and with adaptation measures. And we're also less flexible in movement and getting to relocation zones that are considered safe given our limited flexibility. So this is, I think, a big element, as well as the fact that there is intersectional discrimination. So a lot of women don't only suffer the consequences of their gender, but also of their sexual orientation, of their race, of their religion, of all those different elements that kind of contribute atop of all of that. And I think the reason why this is an absolutely fantastic, or why the green transition is such a great, fantastic opportunity to kind of try to change the way that we look at women's role in the energy transition, is the fact that it is a transition, which means it is flexible, it can move, it can change. And that change in itself allows us to kind of break up the structures that's kind of stiff and try to kind of move in a direction that will allow us to increase gender equality in the same time. So yeah, I think that's the contributions that I have, and I'll hand over to Rosa.
Thank you. Listen, I would like to put in the current context this discussion because we're talking about the opportunity of just transition, what a just transition can bring. Well, we are already in a situation where defining timid the approach of governments and of COP in general is an euphemism, because they are not taking the necessary measures that the climate crisis requires. But we need to realize that the situation is getting even worse. I don't know if you have noticed that in 2-3 weeks war in Ukraine, we got rid of the pandemic and we got rid of the climate crisis altogether. This says a lot, because nobody is now, or nobody is not, I don't know if nobody knows or nobody wants to tell us the impact of the bombing, of the war in Ukraine in terms of carbon emission due to the conflict, to the bombs. Bombs are not green, that's for sure. That's for sure. And bombs are not helping a just transition where women have the power to influence the choice. Second things I want to say is that in this crisis, energetic crisis, that is a consequence of this war, there are talks and even more than talks that maybe we need to resume to carbon plants to produce energy instead of continuing to abandon the carbon plants as a source of energy. And this is not helping the transition. So I think, and this is a proposal that I would like to bring to this discussion and in the CSW, that maybe as women around the world fighting for justice, equality, and a sustainable environment for all, we should start claiming that we need to stop investing resources, governments have to stop investing resources in armaments, that this armament is really a need if we want to ensure the sustainability of the planet and the future for women and men on the planet, and that those resources has to be converted in investment in public services and in quality energy for all.
Thank you, Rosa, and thank you also for raising this really relevant issue that always concerns about climate justice and gender and climate and just transition, because we all know that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is also a conflict about gas and resources. So, Wonom, please take the floor and share your thoughts.
Thank you. Our women are mainly working as well on the farm and also growing rice and also growing fruit crops like mangoes and plums, different kind of fruit crops. So with the impacts of climate change, it's extreme droughts and also floods. So that has impacted and also destroyed rice crops and also fruit crops. So one of the initiatives to do and to survive and to remain their yield is to connect to the last mile pipe so that they can get water into the field. So what they are doing is they really have to spend a lot in terms of making connection to the water resources, right? So they are using diesel. So in that means they have to pay a lot. And even though women contributed quite little to the emission by using the diesel, but women are really like to contribute to the solution. They are the agent of change. They could also be an agent of change as well. So they want to do and to do something different rather than using diesel. So they turn to use solar in the agriculture, using solar to drive rather than using diesel. So in that, I mean, we see that women really, really want to be engaged in the energy part. And also it's becoming like, it's not a technical issue of the energy sector or energy system anymore. So it's becoming like social issue where women are also interested in, because they are impacted by the impact of climate change. They want to see what they can do. And also the path that they are choosing is really sustainable because they are using renewables. So with that, I think that it's kind of in the trend as well that not just using their diesel would also help them to save their money, less expenditure by using solar. So the money to invest on solar, that is another thing. Yeah, I mean, in terms of getting the loan or having their own resources, or having a direct access to some other funds. But I mean, it's there in terms of they really want to drive change by themselves and to use the alternative power rather than continuing using the fuel. So that is also saving that cost. So for now, thank you, Liana.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing this great experience. And now, please, Teresa, your turn.
Thanks, Liliana. So now maybe I'll talk a little bit about the principles that we developed as ActionAid, which we developed thinking about for agriculture and extractives, but very much also apply to the energy sector. We discuss these principles with our allies in the trade unions and realize that they're actually quite useful across all sectors. So the first principle that would apply, and indeed is an answer to your question, is that it's really important, it's a challenge, and it's really important that just transitions address and do not exacerbate equality. We need to make sure that as a transition is taking place, there's a real understanding of what the underlying inequalities are and how this can be addressed, particularly how women are already disadvantaged in the current system. So we really need to put gender analysis at the heart of any transformation. Secondly, there needs to be a systemic change, not tokenism, not false solutions, not incremental tweaks. A real transformation to address the climate crisis has to be totally transformative, and it has to work for people, nature, and the climate. So it must be holistic, it must be ecological with social justice principles, and of course, have gender just transformation at its heart. The third principle is that it must be inclusive and ensure inclusive participation. So that means mapping all the relevant stakeholders, including, the women, the community members, seasonal migrant workers affected by the change, not just the salaried male workers, but, their families, the people that own the local shops, or the whole community that is going to be affected by an energy transition, an agriculture transition. All of those people matter. So it's important to bring their voices to the table and create a space where their voices can be heard, where we can understand what the changes will mean to their livelihoods and what their perspectives and solutions would be to help them make that change. And we require that governments don't just tell individuals that that's their responsibility to make that shift. No, the government has a responsibility, to help communities identify alternative livelihoods and to make that change. So that means ensuring social protection, support, training. If you've got a new business, it's about creating a new route to market, investment, subsidies, etc., all to make sure that it happens and that workers, women, farmers, communities have what they need to make that change. And so, of course, there are slight differences between the energy sector and the agriculture sector, but these four principles seem to apply to just transitions across the board, and so can be a useful checklist.
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you for develop the principles. They are really, really useful. And if you have time to, you have a chance to share the principles in the chat, it will be great, because I'm pretty sure that all the participants want also to know more about the principles and the work you are doing. Well, so we have had a great conversation about challenge and opportunities, and it's time to to start the discussion, the second discussion on how decarbonization of energy systems could contribute to the women's empowerment and the advancements of women's rights. So, so I have an open question to all of you about this CSW about I mean in the framework of the CSW, and how do you think that how can CSW 66 be key advocacy space and pressure point to push for a gender just transition, and what do we need afterwards? So Juliet, you are the first.
Yes, I'm gonna go again. So this is a question that is specifically interesting for me, given the fact that I've been working a bit with international mechanisms around Geneva more than around CSW. But I think CSW, given the fact that it's the only forum to that extent that tackles women's rights and women's concerns, makes it an absolute key space to push for a gender just transition, for a gender lens onto climate justice issues. And I think that's what's so unique about this year's CSW, is that it's the first time that they actively connect women with climate justice, which makes it an absolute fantastic space to break those silos that we usually have with organizations only working on gender, organizations only working on climate, but to try to bridge that gap, which is absolutely fantastic. So I think how we can use CSW, and that's something that we as GI will always promote and push forward, is this idea of making connections, of creating partnerships, of engaging, of learning from each other, of growing alongside each other. And I really think that this is something that we need to push stronger, especially within the feminist movement, because through feminist collaboration we have so much possibilities to grow stronger as a movement and as an alliance, that we should so really use this space as an opportunity for networking, for mutual learning, and to also lobby. I mean, CSW gives us the chance to meet with states, to have those connections with states, to connect with organizations that know states. That's to kind of, get into this space and use that chance to lobby and input into the outcome document specifically. So yeah, and looking at CSW generally and what's happening at this CSW, and specifically at the methods of work which are going to be renewed, we need to strengthen civil society participation in the CSW space. We need to ensure that the methods of work allow for more civil society participation, and thus to also make sure that civil society in itself offers the opportunity to women to take the floor and to participate in those spaces and bring our narratives and our experiences to the table. So I think this is going to be key at this CSW and at all future events as well that we have. Whether they directly only tackle women's rights or only tackle climate change related issues, but try to bridge the gap and break those silos, I think is absolutely crucial.
Thank you, and I'm also really impressed because there are a lot of parallel events and all of them are full of participants. So it's great to know many people interested on those topics. I don't know who was the one who raised the hand first, but I'm gonna give the floor to Wonam.
Wanun was first.
No, thank you, Rosa. So please.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I agree also with Juliet. And also just to add on to that is all the work would have to be done at the national level. So that could also mean after connecting with others at the CSW, I am here in Bangkok, but I would imagine that a lot would do a lot of connections as well at CSW 66. And also there would be a chance to meet with the states. So that would also mean, for example, just like not just those who are responsible for a gender and women's issue from the state level, they would also get to understand about the climate issues. So that kind of link could also be made. And when getting back at the country level, some of the link could also be explored and also expanded. So that's how I think it's expanded at the national level. So if, for example, a CSO who's there working on climate change in CSW, could make connection with the government who's been working on the gender and women's issue. So when they get back, they could start and also kind of learn and expand the relationship, and somehow it's breaking the silo manner of working just only on the energy issue and climate issue and also the women's issue. So somehow I would think that the work could also be expanded at the national level. Thank you.
Yeah, totally agree with
Rosa.
you. So Rosa, it's your turn.
Well, Wanon actually anticipated some of the things I wanted to say. I would like to stress on the fact that connecting gender and women role with just transition is just one part of the mainstreaming of the gender issues that we have been fighting for over decades now. At least me, I'm an old woman, so you are younger than me, but that's what my experience is. And I think that just for the reason that Julia stressed at the beginning, because we are half of the world population, well, we need to be heard and our position has to be recognized. But this means actually that we need to change the narrative and remove all the bias that continue to exist on the role of women in so many different sectors. We have been engaging in, and we continue to be engaged as one of the priority of my organization on the social redistribution of care, which we consider a key issue. And that has a lot to do also with a just transition to a society where all the natural and economic and human resources can be equally shared to reduce injustice. I think this is an important issue. And what about the CSW? Well, we have seen in the past that there's, the UN system is a little bit magmatic, I would say, no? And move really slowly. And it's really time consuming to try to go through that system with the message that we want to bring and with the decision that we want to bring. I think that one of the fundamental issues that we need to continue to raise is the fact that multi-stakeholderism is not the response to give a greater role to civil society organization and to NGOs, because it leaves too much space to business and corporate to continue to drive their interest. We need democratic rules to recognize the role of civil society organization, but refer to what we can do, of course, continuing lobbying, continuing participating, building, the alliances that can make us stronger. But what is fundamental is that we continue to train our members locally, because we can be much more effective if we arrive at the CSW with a work done before, country by our members, that can influence the government and multiply the effect and the impact of our position. That's what I think.
Yeah, Teresa.
Thanks so much, Rosa. And I think building on that, I would, of course, emphasize again that just transition processes need to be inclusive and participatory, and make sure that they're hearing the voices and perspectives of a diversity of women, especially those most marginalized. But governments, it's not just about governments or policymakers opening the door to see who comes in, because we know it will be like the confident men in suits with PowerPoints who will come in and give their perspectives, and the women on the ground might not be the ones who feel that they're allowed into that space to share their stories. They may also have like cultural barriers, like in a lot of the communities they work with, women have often been told their whole lives that their perspectives aren't important. So there's an underlying problem. The policymakers tend to hear elite men's views, and policy solutions only tend to solve elite men's problems. So it's incredibly important that women get access to those spaces, but also that they have the opportunity for empowerment, to build their confidence, to build their analysis, so that they can articulate their perspectives, their challenges, their solutions, and to become leaders in their communities. As ActionAid, like our work in communities, often working with communities on the front lines of the climate crisis, the farmers who are coping with, crop failures or disasters and floods, we do a lot of work with them on agriculture, adaptation and disaster risk reduction. Part of the strategy to physical solutions is actually the internal empowerment solution as well. So we work to create spaces, safe spaces for women to gather, to analyze and articulate their particular challenges and solutions. And that becomes a route for confidence, for empowerment, where they can tell the rest of the community what needs to happen and become leaders, and themselves, walk through that policymaker's door and tell them what needs to happen, and to hold policymakers to account, help shape local decisions and shape policy. So just transitions and the need to include women's perspectives can be an opportunity. It can be a route for long-term empowerment of women so that they can shape solutions to the climate crisis that work for all of us.
Thank you. And how can we make sure that a movement pushing for climate action and just transition incorporate a transformative agenda that considers women's need, experience, and concern? Is all about what you say, Teresa, because of course these kind of spaces are really important, because make people from the gender movement and also to the climate and environmental movement be engaged, but how and it's a great opportunity, but how we make it real, how we push for the climate action and just transition to incorporate a transformative agenda for gender transition also. I don't know if Teresa wants to start, or probably someone else.
Well, I agree with what you're saying, and I would say that as civil society, as unions, as organizations, our role is to help accompany and support the movements and the people on the ground for their voices to be heard. And so I think that is one of the power of unions, of movements, is that creates a space for collective analysis, for voices, and empowerment, and for transformation of policy. And indeed, that is one of the principles at the heart of the union's analysis of just transition, that social dialogue is always between the unions and the members and the governments, in order to make those collective decisions together. So the role of people is absolutely critical in a just transition. You cannot have just transition without people, and really you cannot have a just transition unless civil society helps to recognizes its role in helping that happen as well.
Juliet, and then Wonam.
Sure. So my point is still kind of forming in my head, so that might be a bit a chaotic intervention here. But I think what is very important is that we've been talking a lot about a just transition. But what does a just transition actually mean, and justice for who and justice when? I think those two questions are absolutely crucial, because we already see it within the feminist movement, right? There is no such thing as one feminism. There's so many people that adhere to different principles and different concepts of what it means to be a feminist or not. And the same applies for climate justice. What does it mean? When does it get together? So I think what we need to have is more spaces of interaction and dialogue, the ones that we have right here, for example, where we have a chance to really exchange with the panelists, but also with participants, get input into how we see the world going, where we see the just transition going, and then make sure that there is collective action in those kind of movements. And to respect the diversity of civil society that we have, whether it's an organization just working on climate, just working on gender, just working on energy, we can learn so much from each other and grow alongside from each other and enable us to take space in spaces that we have not before engaged with. And especially in the energy field, I think it's important to keep in mind that it is very, very very small in that sense when it comes to women's participation. When we look at the amount of space that women get in energy corporations, it's really, really little. And the same with international negotiation spaces. How many diplomats do we see around the COPs that are women? So those are all spaces where we have a lot of still power and leverage to increase women's participation and to be able to thus push for a gender just green transition, because we cannot push for a gender green transition without having people that have experienced marginalization because of their gender kind of take the floor and lead us forward. So it's important to give the voices to people who have experiences and who have faced marginalization, and to empower those voices from the ground, as Teresa has already said as well. So yeah.
Thank you. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, just to add on to that as well, I think we need to do a lot in terms of empowering women on the ground, and that part could also be engaging them to understand the just transition, to understand in terms to kind of highlight what they have been doing in driving the transition. And our role could also be to, as an NGO, could also be to provide and to facilitate for these women on the ground to have a tool and resources to speak about their own stories. So that could also be powerful in terms of their understand, and then they have come up with their own stories. It could also be the impacts of power plants, fossil fuels, or it could be also like initiatives that they have been taken on the ground in terms of using energy democracy or decentralized energy, or even renewable sources of energy. So that would also be really powerful. And creating the space like Juliet and also Teresa was saying. So at the natural process, women's space will never be happening. So it has to be created. So it's our role as well to create that space, because it won't happen naturally. So in that case, so people are speaking up, women are speaking up. And then we should also find the advocacy opportunity so that women could also do that, their own advocacy as well at the grassroots, and also to challenge the male dominant existing movement as well. So that could also be part of having voices of the women in the transition. And lastly, also to support and strengthen the grassroots women's movement. So that could also be part of kind of the movement that's on their own on the ground, and that could also be linked to the one at the regional and also national level, but that is really grounded, and that would also be powerful in driving the change. Thank you.
Rosa?
Yes, we from our side are working to train not only women to the issue of just transition as part of our global mainstreaming approach to a more transformative economy that will ensure justice and equality, but also with projects and researches and material that can help informing workers on the fundamental issues that refer to just transition, because sometimes we also, leave the contradictions where workers in their position in their plants, particularly energy workers that are still carbon-based, they tend to defend their jobs. Of course, it's natural, but there may be different way to approach the transition and to face the transition. And this is something for us very important, because it means raising awareness, creating the condition to propose alternative models, and also an alternative way to have workers and women and the community involved to a same objective. And again, when we have to deal with these situations, building alliances is very much important with workers, but also with the community, because together we can be stronger.
Definitely. I'm really impressed because all of you mentioned the importance of empower local women, give them voices, but also support them in the understanding the needs of just transition and the opportunities and also the challenges. So I would love to come back a little bit about challenges and opportunity, and also because I know that you have a lot of experience working with concrete cases and concrete women movements. So I would like you to tell us a little bit more about what promising developments have you seen of being a part of what that makes you optimistic about the just transition movement, and concrete experience that you might have and you tell us about. So if someone wants to share. Yes, Juliet.
Sure, happy to. So I think there's two things that come to my mind. So one thing, I'm going back to the UN spaces once more. When we look at the UN treaty bodies, so those are the mechanisms that, states have signed a specific human rights treaty, and they overlook the implementation of that human rights treaty. And they give recommendations to states about the steps that they should be taking in order to improve their human rights situation in their country. And what we have seen is an increased mentioning of climate change concerns and climate justice concerns, also with a gender lens. So we do see that, first of all, civil society has been pushing this issue from the ground, right? So calling in shadow reports towards those committees to take up climate change concerns and just transition concerns. But we've also seen that experts have kind of started to change their thinking around climate change as being a separate issue, but start to see that human rights are actually at the center of the debates that we have around climate justice. So that, I think, is a very promising development, because it gives us a very strong framework to work with climate justice issues and concerns. And the other element is to see that there's been a lot more litigation going on. There's so many climate change related cases that we have been calling on to. GI specifically, we've been involved in a case of a French corporation that is trying to build, or is building, a wind farm on indigenous grounds in Mexico, and having pushed that case forward towards the UN spaces, as well as to the French courts. So there is a lot more litigation and awareness going on about this, a lot more people standing up for their rights and knowing how to use the mechanisms. And I think that is a huge potential that we can still grab, like bring more cases to the courts, whether that's the regional human rights courts, whether that's the UN treaty bodies, whether that's your national court systems. Bring those cases forward so we can try to increasingly strengthen that framework that we have. So I think that's two very promising developments that we see on an international level.
Totally sure. So who else who else would love to share some? experience, Teresa, some opportunities? Yeah.
Well, I would say one thing that I'm really optimistic and positive developments that I see from the agriculture world is how women farmers movements are an incredible force. I would say African, Asian, Latin American civil society has done so much work over the last years to put women farmers at the center of the discussion, at the call for transformation, for agroecology, for food sovereignty, for the right to food, and the power, the voice, the energy, the momentum of these women farmers movements are absolutely astonishing and incredibly inspiring. And I'm just every day I'm blown away by the incredible work they do and their incredible articulacy and the way that they have so much courage to hold duty bearers to account once they've gone on this journey of transformation and empowerment is incredibly exciting. And I know that our future is has a chance because we're working together, because they're calling the decision makers and forcing them to do the right thing. So it's incredibly inspiring how women movements are really taking that space and are gonna push the planet to do so much better as a result. So I think we can be optimistic about that. And maybe on a small scale, a small observation, in fact, that when it comes to the energy transition, on just transition, the three leaders that I know are the most visible in the spaces that I'm with, you know, the leader of the International Trade Union, Sharon Burrow, Alison Tate, who does so much of the leading work on just transition, Samantha Smith of the Just Transition Center. It's actually all women who are leading the just transition in energy and unions. And so that really inspires me to know that women workers' perspectives are really being there at the center of this shift. So that gives me confidence that we're going in the right direction too.
We are definitely in the right direction. Yeah. So Wonam, you have the floor also.
Yeah, the way I'm a bit reluctant to share is not that it's not promising, but it's really slow. From what I'm coming from, let's say if there is, for example, a bad project, an energy project like hydro or even coal-fired power plant or even gas-fired power plants going on in my country, that will be different movements, including women's movement, and that I am happy to see. And also our women's grassroots are also against those. But then the success that we got was just, okay, it was successful to stop that project, but it's not in such a way that it's totally out of the policy, the plan and the policy. So the very big challenge is movement could also be very active against something, a very proactive one. Once it's done, then you would also need to create, for example, kind of momentum still, so that it goes on. And let's say, if I'm talking about big utilities, one power plant is stopped by different movements and women's movement. They could move around to different places. So the challenge could also be like, how can you make one movement to continue to other areas, not just only following where the location will be changing, but at the policy level. So in such a sense, in such a manner that it stopped from the policy, it removed from the policy rather than from the project side. So yes, a good promising in terms of on the ground that the movement is there, but in terms of continuation to different and following and trying to challenge the policy and also the big corporations, that is also another a challenge. So a small success, but a first good step to continue.
Thank you. Small steps are also incredible. So the life is about a lot of small successful. So I don't know, Rosa, if you want to share some experience about what gives you hopes before we pass to the other session.
Well, what give us hope is the fact that we see that there's a growing awareness in citizens, population, in people around the world, how much different factors are interconnected. The climate crisis with the health crisis we just went through in the past 2 years, migration, which is another important topic we work, and gender migration particularly we work on in PSI. We see that there's more awareness on that, and that response requires a structural change in the economic global system. But I would also raise the issue that it's not enough to be a woman to speak up for just transition, because often, with these slogans, this nice word, there are hidden interests that not always correspond to what we really need. And we need to be aware of that. Also, language is important. And I think that we, as a progressive civil society organization, need to pay more and more attention to how we use the word and how much we mutuate the language from the business world.
Thank you all of you for having this great conversation about impact of climate change and how this impact is different according to woman, but also is different if we are talking about women in the ground and the intersection between these impacts, and also how the transition is also an opportunity to promote a real transformation about on systemic problems. So I would like you to invite all of you to talk about the final remarks, the things that you think that are the key and the most important, and the message that you would like to bring to us, to the governments, to the CSW forum. So please feel free to give us the final remarks. I don't know, Juliet, if you've been the first always, so I give you the honor.
Sure, I'll take that honor. Thank you. So I think one question that has been luring around this conversation in general is that question of business and human rights. What roles should businesses play? How can we make sure that businesses don't take over all the spaces? You know, when we look at the last COP, where the fossil fuel lobby has literally been the majority of stakeholders that were present, how can we kind of make sure that we are not playing into their narratives? And how can we make sure that we really do have a just transition that is not based around a corporate idea of just transition, a corporate idea of democracy, and especially of gender equality? I think that is absolutely key to keep in mind. And I think the other element is to empower grassroots movements and to enable them to connect, whether that is on a local, regional, or international level, to make sure that we raise up the voices of the people who have the greatest experience and the most knowledge around the just transition and why we really need it and why we have to push for it. And to create inclusive spaces and be aware that, you know, what we're talking about is an intersectional issue. We cannot treat it as silos. We have to break those silos and make sure that we have stronger stronger connections and networks on different levels that we can use and promote. So yes, I think those are probably the key takeaways from my side.
Thank you. And I haven't seen any questions on the box. So if someone in the audience wants to make some questions to the panelists, please feel free to write it on, and I can read them. But Teresa, please, your final remarks before questions.
I think the just transition approach and principle has been incredibly important, as in fact is probably is going to be the key to success for us to have a chance to address the climate crisis. You know, we need to address the climate crisis, we need radical transformation, and there are huge barriers and challenges and vested interests ahead. And we have to recognize that workers have, in many cases, been understandably worried about what a transformation away from fossil fuels or industrial agriculture will mean for them. You know, and in many cases, the workers are the ones resisting that change. And so the just transition process is absolutely key if it's inclusive, if it allows women, communities and workers to really articulate what is, how they are currently disempowered, or the challenges and inequalities they face in these current exploitative systems. If they can point those out and help chart a pathway to a better, greener future that works for them, that takes account of the unpaid burden of care, that takes account of all the social interests that we all have as people, and gets them on a pathway for more sustainable, inclusive, socially responsible and responsive livelihoods. If a just transition can be a path to help those former people that resisted the transition to become the strongest advocates for change. And that is the most powerful thing about the just transition, and women are going to be a key part of that.
Yes, Unam.
Yeah, thank you. That's very a very important message as well from the previous speakers. And also just to add on, to bring in the new ideas, kind of from what we've been working on the ground, and also our government is talking about just transition, and that means from coal to gas. So and then a gas to renewables. So we think that it must not be a step by step. It could also be a leapfrog and radical change as well. That it's even from fossil fuel could also a leapfrog to renewables. And also a lot of corporations are also talking about renewables. And they are taking up the marketplace and also the space to talk about renewables, despite the fact that they are investing on fossil fuels as well. So in a way, it's creating another kind of monopoly as well. Like corporations who are investing on fossil fuels, they are also investing in the renewables. So that is not something we want to see, right? We want to see in terms of decentralized and also energy democracy. So those kind of changes. So I think maybe we need to also do a lot on the ground, engaging with those on the ground. And what is needed is to recognize what is already on the ground. That is already just transition. But it's just like people are not recognizing it. Women on the ground are also, like I said, they are implementing shift, not using diesel engine, but using solar fuel engine in order to bring water into their farms. So a lot of them are using these initiatives, and that is already a transition. So just recognizing those and expanding those and supporting those with whatever is necessary in terms of like the discussion and the direct support and also technology to bring it up to the level that it's all over the places, rather than coming up with a new one like that. So I would think that it's already there, the answer, and it's already sustainable and just, and that is already a transition. So we need to recognize those on the ground.
Thank you, Rosa.
Well, I think that in our discussion, one of the major contradiction has been brought clearly on the table. And the fact is that if we want the global governance to continue to be a democratic institution led by democratic institution, we need to ask that corporate and business are excluded from the decision-making process. Those who make interest, profit on their work cannot be part of the decision on the regulation. This is what is shifting the power from government to corporates. And this is the contradiction that we have seen in all the so-called plurilateral free trade agreements. This is the contradiction that we have seen in the discussion during the pandemic on the waiver on TRIPS, intellectual property regulation within the WTO. This is what we are seeing in the COPs, where corporates, energy corporates, are dominating the scene and the decision. And this is what we need to shift. Otherwise, we need to surrender to the idea that the future is a sort of oligarchy of these big corporates that will decide everything. And I would like also to stress one thing. We often talk or will listen of the fact that, well, that's not possible because government, particularly in the global south, are very much corrupted. And so they cannot lead a transition. They cannot take decisions that bring to the expected result, outcome. Well, it's called corruption when it refers to government in the global south. And what about the lobby that pay for electing presidents and members of parliaments in all the global north? This is a sort of legalized corruption where private interests take over the general interest that should be represented by democratic elected institutions. And I think this is a fundamental fight if we want to reach any reasonable change. And I think women, because they are less involved sometimes in business, well, they can have a stronger voice on that. I think this is crucial. I think this is crucial. Maybe I'm too radical, but you know, getting older, you get also more radical. You have enough of what you have seen.
Radicalness is also really important. So thank you, Rosa, for sharing your thoughts. I have one question which I found really interesting. So I would like to ask to the one who wants to answer. And the question is about that it's become clear that the real work is done by trade unions and NGOs, while states are greenwashing rather than set real measures for just transition. So how to help states accountable and how empower the global south to act? We are about to finish, so I will ask for short interventions for the one who wants to do it. I don't know, Rosa, if you have the answer. Teresa, yeah.
I can certainly try to speak to the first question about how to hold state to account. And I think it's really accurate, as the commenter said, that state, and as Wanun mentioned, you know, states are using the term just transition. We see in the EU farm to fork strategy, and here all around we're seeing the term just transition coming up more and more. So that's a win, that's a hook, that's good. But we know that these are not, in most cases, the real just transition that we know has to happen. You know, when governments usually are not meaning transformative, inclusive approaches that, you know, that address inequality and put in place all of the components. So I mean, so certainly one thing we're doing is keep pushing that checklist and saying, you know, these 4 principles are just transition. Unless you have these, you cannot call it a just transition. That's one simple thing that we keep doing to refer and try to hold them to account.
If I can add something, is that we need to look also to the investment of government, the resources that are available. Already we criticized the decision of the COP27 that the resources were not enough to address the climate crisis. We see now a big discussion going over in all the Western world to increase the investment in the military because of this new division of the world that is going to prepare our future. Well, I think that we need to stop those claims to invest more in defense, in armaments, while investing more in public services, in investment in technologies to help a just transition that can really create a sustainable future for all.
Yes, and to maybe add to that as well, is one way to hold states accountable, and here I go again, is by using the UN mechanisms. The UN human rights mechanisms, the treaty bodies, and I would also like at this point to let everybody know that GI is very happy to support grassroots movements and local NGOs to bring their voices to the UN and to the treaty bodies. So we're always very happy to support those kind of NGOs to get to the UN spaces, because it's a very hard space to understand if you have no one that has been in it or that knows how things work. It's honestly sometimes a nightmare, even if you know how it works or you think you know how it works. And the other element to the second part of the questions of how to empower the Global South, and I don't want to address it completely. I think, you know, I am from the Global North. It's not my place to that extent. But what I can add to that is that the Global North needs to step back. We need to give space to the Global South rather than trying to voice them or take their points as our points. We need to give the Global South space to make sure that they're being heard rather than speaking over them. So I think that's one thing that the Global North has not been really good at, and something that we really have to work on, whether that's on state level or also on civil society level. So yeah.
Thank you, Juliet. I don't know who raised the hand first, but I will give the floor to Wonan, please.
Thank you very much. Yeah, how to empower this Global South. I think first thing could also be to share information as well. So that could also be who's, in terms of the finance and investments, in terms of like who's financing what, and does that kind of finance is leading to a just transition, for example. So maybe it's kind of tracking in terms of the finance and investments that could also be shared among the Global North and also the Global South. And then in terms of the advocacy activity could also be kind of joined together as a global effort in order to hold the governments accountable with the they are doing in the direction of just transition that we want to see. And yeah, I would think that could also be as a starting point in terms of like collaboration between the Global North and also the Global South.
Thank you. And now, Teresa, your turn.
I'll come back again because I was inspired by the other speakers to say that absolutely, you know, climate finance is really the key part as well to just transitions really taking place and to Global South being empowered. Countries in the Global South are already on the front lines of the climate crisis. You know, if you're hit by a disaster, you tend to have to use your scarce resources to recover, to rebuild, sometimes even to relocate in the aftermath of, you know, cyclones and floods, droughts, wildfires, rising sea levels. So if you have any money left over after dealing with these crises, you will usually be motivated to spend it on resilience, on adapting to future impacts, because you want to try to limit your vulnerability in the future. So that means you're very unlikely to have much money left over after that, you know, to make that green transition, to invest in renewables, to invest in the green infrastructure, the green pathways for that just transition. You also in the Global South tend not to have, or Global South countries usually don't have much historical responsibility for causing the climate crisis. You know, they've done the least to cause the climate crisis, but are most affected. So that is why the UN system that, you know, that says to countries, you know, you should be channeling funds from global north to south to help cope with the climate crisis is absolutely critical. And we've seen a dismal failure by wealthy countries to pay anything like their fair share of climate finance. And that climate finance piece will be absolutely critical and must happen if we're to have just transitions in the Global South and around the world.
Thank you all. We are almost finished. I would love to thank all the reflections, but also highlight a few final remarks. Firstly, I would love to say that our voice has to be heard. Women are already promoting gender just transitions to low carbon world in several communities across the world, and we need to bring that voices to the key decisions making spaces to ensure we achieve gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls in the context of climate change. I also would like to remark that gender is not only a nice word that you add to someone, to something, to you add to energy transition. There are principles, as Teresa mentioned. There are a lot of information and a lot of values about what gender means. And if we want to rise gender, of course, we need to respect the word and to really deep in the women's rights and involve communities and involve all what genders means. And also participation is really important. I mean, we need to keep moving on enforcement of women to close the gap and create spaces to them to analyze their challenge and to find with them the solutions and make them confident and leaders and make them raise their hands and their voices in the places that need to be listened. And also it's really important that we push that we push for alternatives, developed models that of course redefine the human environmental relationship and the advance advancing sustainable equality that challenge the division of the world and the structural basis of the racist, but also the exclusion of women in the policy maker creation process. And of course, we have a lot of tools. There are a lot of principles. We have also a human rights framework which has been developed for many years, and we have all the inspiration that Congress experience has been raised. and of course it gives us hope, but also we are in a really important moment because transition is about change, and we need change, and we need systematic change that includes reduce the armamentist chain, and also the change the way that investment is understand, but also we need to change the relation between global south and global north, and that's why this moment is also important, because talking about energy transition is also an opportunity to talk about change and talk about structural and systematic change, because of course climate change is about justice, is about justice between the north and the south. So I will like to thank to all the organizations that made this webinar possible, to the panelists for the work that you do in the ground, for the voice that you raise here, and I really makes me feel not only happy but also really proud of being women also. So thanks to the Public Service International, thanks to ActionAid, to Zeus, and to Climate Watch Thailand to be part of the panel, and thank also to the participants, because I saw that they were really active in the chat. I really think that this is the kind of discussions that we have to continue supporting, and we hope that we and all the movement around this forum could be together and continue moving to a forward just transition with gender equality. So thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure to moderate this panel, and see you hopefully soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thank you
Bye,
so much.
thank you.
Thank you,
for
bye.
sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.